So now that we've got our sound effects all working just the way we want to, we're going to add a new kind of fun system into the game and add a way to keep track of a multiplier for our player when they're destroying bricks. And basically this system will work by, if the player can manage to destroy multiple bricks in a row, for every extra brick they hit, they'll get a multiplication of whatever their score would be. So to do that, we're going to add a bit of text onto the screen up here to show to the player that they're actually getting the multiplier. So we're going to go into our canvas here, and where we have the lives text, I'm going to duplicate that, and then I'm going to just drag it down to here, and we're going to change the text that this displays to say current multiplier, and we're going to say x1. So x1 will be the default one. We can't see all of that on the screen there, so we're going to just stretch that across like that. There we go. And then now that we have that in place, let's go into our game manager, and we're going to create a reference to it. So on our game manager up here, we're going to create a reference to that bit of text. We're going to say public text, we'll call it multiplier text. I think would make the most sense. Multiplier text, like that. And then we'll need a way of keeping track of what our actual current multiplier is. So we'll say a public int for current multiplier, and we're going to set it so that this by default is actually 1, and we're going to explicitly state that in the script rather than having to type it in Unity itself. So it's just a different way of being able to use this stuff. And we're also going to set a maximum amount of what our current multiplier can be. So we're here going to say public int max multiplier, and we're going to set this by default to be 8. And the thing with setting it by default here in the script, you can actually make a change to that within Unity. So I'm just going to show an example of that here. So if we pop back into Unity, wait for it to compile, and we'll go to our game manager, and we see we have our current multiplier and our max multiplier. So we've set them up by default to start out as 1 and 8, but we can actually adjust those values just as much as we want to. We can set our maximum multiplier to be 12 if we want to. We can start our players off with a multiplier of 5. We're free to edit those values, but it's just a handy way of setting it up so that if you go and create a new game manager, those values will automatically be added in. So we'll just save this, and we're just going to fill in our multiplier text into there. I should actually rename this to say multiplier text. So on our game manager, we can just drag that into the slot there, just the way we want to. And so then in our game manager, we want to obviously have a way of displaying that out to the player. We're going to have that be updated by the ball whenever it hits against the brick. But to be able to update it within our game manager, we're going to need a function to do that. So we're going to go down here, and we're going to say public void add multiplier, like that. And we're going to say, okay, if we're adding a multiplier, we must have hit a nice brick, so we can say our current multiplier plus equals 1, so we're adding 1 onto it. Then we'll do a check and see if our current multiplier is greater than our max multiplier. So if our player has got this multiplier going too high, we can say, okay, if that's true, then we want to reset our current multiplier back to being equal to the maximum multiplier, because we don't want players running away and getting like multipliers of, I don't know, 20 to 25 and getting their scores crazily high. We kind of want to be able to control that a little bit. So we're saying, okay, our current multiplier is being set to be whatever the max multiplier is, and then we want to make sure that we're displaying that on the screen. So we'll say our multiplier text dot text is equal to current multiplier colon space, and then we add on whatever our current multiplier actually is, like that. So now we have our multiplier being able to be reset, or sorry, to be able to be set. We also want it to be able to be reset. So if our player manages not to be able to hit another brick and the ball goes back down and it hits against the player, every time the player has to hit the ball back up again, our multiplier gets reset back to being 1. So to do that, we'll just add another function here to say public void reset multiplier. And on this one, all it has to do is say our current multiplier is equal to 1. And again, we need to update the text on the screen to say that. So we'll just copy this line of code and paste it in there. Perfect. So we have our multiplier being updated now. So let's apply it so that it actually does something in our game. And the way we can do that is in our add score function here. All we have to do is say, okay, whatever the score is that we want to add, we want to multiply that by what our current multiplier is. So we're saying if our score is adding 100 and our multiplier is 5, now our score to add becomes 500, and that's added on to whatever our current score is. Nice and simple. So we've got this system set up now, so let's make sure that we can call that from our ball. So we already have the game manager attached to our ball, so we already don't need to worry about adding that in again. So here we can say if the other game object that we're hitting is a brick, well hey, we can just go to the game manager, we can say on the game manager add some multiplier to it. Because we've hit a brick, so our player is able to start getting that multiplier chain going. Then the next thing we want to do is say, okay, what if the thing that we have hit is the player? So we can add a check for the player tag. So if other.gameObject.tag equals player. So player is one of the default tags included within Unity, and we can go ahead and add that onto the player himself. Although it hasn't got that just yet, we can go down here and say, wait for it to compile, there we go. We can go to our paddle, which is basically what represents the player, and we can go to the tags and go down to player here and add that as one of the tags, so we don't have to go through the hassle of creating a new tag for it. So basically what we're saying now is if the other tag is the player, actually I'm sitting here thinking about it, and it would probably make more sense to have it so that we're checking if the other tag isn't the player. Instead of rewarding the player punishing the player for having to bounce the ball back up, what we should do is reward the player for managing to keep the chain going by bouncing it without hitting against the wall. So what we're saying here is if the other game object isn't the player, and we'll also say if, we'll make this an else if statement. So we're saying if the other object is a brick, then do all this. Otherwise, if it isn't the player, so then the only other option is if it's the walls at the side, or no, that's the only other option. If it's the walls at the side, then what we'll do is at this point we'll reset the multiplier. So if the other object tag isn't the player, so if we're hitting the wall, we can say, okay, on the game manager we will call reset multiplier, like that. And that's all fine and dandy, but there's one other thing we want to do, which is whenever we enter the zone of resetting the ball, we want to make sure that we reset the multiplier at the exact same time, because we don't want our players being able to kill themselves and keep a multiplier going. So we'll say here on the general manager, or the game manager, we'll call the reset multiplier function. Perfect. Okay, we'll save that. We'll go back into Unity, let that compile, and we should be able to now see the multiplier in action. Oh, we have an error on the screen on ball controller line 77. Oh, yes. We can't say if not other. What we say instead is if the other tag is not equal to player. That's a completely different thing. It's the only situation where not has to actually go into place when we're kind of doing this logic on if statements. But if we save this and go back into the game, we shouldn't have any other errors. There we go, perfect. So now we can play it, and we should be able to see our multiplier in action. So we'll still only see each brick being worth whatever its value is. But there you go, you can see our multiplier going up when we hit a brick, and then going back down when we hit a wall. So then at this point it becomes a matter of skill. And if you have more bricks in your level, it's going to be obviously easier for your players to build up that multiplier. But now you can see suddenly our high score is a lot higher than it would have been just by getting all those objects by themselves. And it's a lot more sensible, and it works a lot better for our players. And it kind of gives them an incentive to try and think about their shots, not just react instantly in the moment.